Okay, so we've looked at the poem and kind of worked out roughly what's going on. Let's have a think about what Armitage is telling us about this man, and by extension what Armitage is suggesting about identity. And this is another one of those big identity poems. It's about what we learn about someone through their acts. In About His Person, which was the first poem in the collection, in the anthology, it's about what we learn about someone by what they're carrying on them when they're dead. And the answer that we get is, well, we don't really learn very much. It's very hard to unpick. It's very hard to kind of piece together the man's life in About His Person through these objects. They're very enigmatic. They're very difficult to decipher. They're very difficult to kind of translate into any sort of meaningful picture of the man. And I think what's something vaguely similar is happening here. Because we get these good acts this man always does, and yet we get this one pretty awful thing that he does to his daughter and to his wife and a couple of times to his mother. And so we get a kind of a mixture of good and bad things. And that's pretty normal, isn't it? I'm not saying that punching your wife in the face is normal. I've certainly never done it, and I don't plan to do it. So I would certainly not ever plan to slipper my daughter, and I can't ever remember stealing money from my mum. No, I didn't. But you see where I'm coming from here. I mean, these acts of violence that people commit, we've all done things we regret. Everybody does things they regret. In the same way everyone does things they feel proud of, they feel that they should have done and that have made other people happy. That's pretty normal. It's pretty extreme here, but in many ways it is a normal life that we're seeing here. But as in so many of Armitage's poems, it's the last two lines which unlock the entire poem. If you're stuck in an exam, if you've got a poem in front of you and you're thrashing around thinking, what on earth am I going to say? How is this poem answering the question on the exam paper? Have a look at the end of the poem, because usually his poems are unlocked in the last few lines. The real meaning of the poem is unlocked right at the end. We get that here. Here's how they rated him when they looked back. Sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. Who are they? Probably his family, his friends, people who knew him. When they looked back, well, he sounds like he's dead, doesn't it? Just like in About His Person. So how did they rate him? What did they think of him when they looked back on his life? Well, sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. Look at the contrast between these distinct acts: shoveling snow, slippering daughters, praising his wife, punching her in the face. These are distinct things that he did, moments in his life, key moments in his life. And yet when he's dead, what do they become? This and that. You can't differentiate this and that. You can differentiate between praising and punching, or tucking his daughter in or slippering her. Those are easy to say, one is good, one is bad. But when you're dead, they seem to become this and that. They seem to lose their individuality. So I think what Armitage is telling us here, or what he's explaining to us about life, is that when we're dead, those key things, those key defining moments actually just become another thing that happened in our lives, and another thing that we did to other people. That it's very hard to look back on a life and remember every single good and bad thing that we do. They kind of all blend into one another in a kind of a bit of sort of a little bit mashed up. Is it pessimistic? I don't think it is. I think it's fairly realistic. If you look back on anyone close to you who's died, can you really remember every single good and bad thing they did, or every single good and bad thing you did with them? No, you can't. You can kind of get you can vaguely remember the good and the bad stuff, but actually it does tend to all sort of blend in together. And I think this is what Armitage is saying here, that a life and identity, when the person dies, those kind of key acts, those everyday things that they do, or those extreme things that they do, they die with them, and what we're left with is this and that. Okay, what I'll do in the last screencast is I'll just look a little bit about the form, the structure, and maybe a bit about the language of the poem.